The dust kicked up as the bay horse's hooves hit the ground on Main Street. Sarah Mackenzie dismounted with calculated movements, her blue eyes scanning every curious face, peering from storefronts and saloon doors. Her worn leather boots touched the wooden planks of Deadwood's main thoroughfare, and immediately snickers erupted from the group of cowboys lounging outside Murphy's saloon. "Well, well, what do we have here?" drawled Jake Morrison, the town's self-appointed tough guy, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Looks like we got ourselves a lost little lady." Sarah adjusted her dusty brown coat, deliberately ignoring the laughter that followed. Her horse snorted, sensing the tension that always seemed to follow her wherever she went. She'd ridden hard for 3 days straight from Colorado territory, and her body ached, but her mind remained sharp as a razor. "You lost, sweetheart?" called out another cowboy, this one with a crooked grin and missing front teeth. "This ain't no place for a woman traveling alone. Might want to head back to wherever you came from before dark." The men erupted in laughter again, slapping their knees and nudging each other. Sarah tied her horse to the hitching post with deliberate slowness, her fingers working the rope with practiced ease. She could feel at least 20 pairs of eyes watching her every move, waiting for her to show fear, to ask for help, to prove she was just another helpless woman who'd wandered too far from civilization. "I'm looking for Sheriff Coleman," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly across the street despite its quiet tone. "Sheriff's busy." Jake Morrison stood up from his chair, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "But I reckon I could help you with whatever problem you got. Name's Jake Morrison, and I pretty much run things around here when the sheriff ain't available." Sarah turned to face him fully for the first time, and something in her gaze made Jake's confident smirk falter slightly. Her eyes held a coldness that didn't match her travel-worn appearance, a depth that spoke of things seen and done that most folks couldn't imagine. "I don't think you can help me with this particular matter, Mr. Morrison," she replied, her voice steady as stone. "This is official business." More laughter erupted from the crowd that had gathered. Word was spreading quickly through Deadwood that there was entertainment on Main Street, a lone woman who thought she had official business with the sheriff. "Official business?" Jake's voice rose with amusement. "Lady, you look like you've been sleeping rough for a week. What kind of official business could you possibly have?" Sarah reached into her coat pocket, and every man within sight tensed slightly. But instead of a weapon, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and travel. She held it up so the crowd could see the official seal, though none of them could read it from their distance. "The kind that involves a federal warrant," she said simply. The laughter died down considerably, replaced by curious murmurs. Jake Morrison's expression shifted from amusement to suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he studied the woman more carefully. "Federal warrant for what?" he demanded. "For whom?" Sarah corrected, folding the paper and returning it to her pocket. "And that's between me and Sheriff Coleman." An older man with a gray beard pushed through the crowd, his deputy's badge catching the afternoon sunlight. "I'm Deputy Williams," he said, his tone more respectful than the others had been. "Sheriff Coleman's over at the courthouse dealing with a land dispute. Should be back within the hour. You're welcome to wait in his office if you'd like." "Much obliged," Sarah nodded, gathering her horse's reins. "Now hold on just a minute." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his hand still hovering near his gun. "We don't know nothing about this woman. Could be anybody. Could be trouble." Sarah paused, one foot already on the wooden step leading to the sheriff's office. She turned back to face Jake, and this time, her smile was thin and dangerous. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "I am trouble. The question is whether I'm your trouble or someone else's." The crowd fell silent. Even the piano music from inside Murphy's saloon seemed to quiet down, as if the very air had grown thick with tension. Sarah's words hung in the dusty street like smoke from a gunfight. "That sounds like a threat to me," Jake said, his voice lower now, more serious. "It's not a threat," Sarah replied, turning to face him fully. "It's a fact. I'm here on federal business, and I suggest you let me conduct it in peace." Deputy Williams stepped between them, sensing the situation was about to escalate beyond words. "Now, let's all just calm down here. Miss, you're welcome to wait for the sheriff. Jake, why don't you and the boys head back to your drinks?" But Jake Morrison wasn't ready to back down. He'd built his reputation in Deadwood on being the toughest man in town, and he wasn't about to let some travel-worn woman make him look weak in front of half the population. "I think we got a right to know who's coming into our town making demands," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the street, "especially when they're carrying federal papers and talking about warrants." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes calculating. She could see the pride in his stance, the way he puffed out his chest, the way his hand kept drifting toward his gun. She'd seen 100 men just like him in a dozen different towns, all thinking they were the fastest draw, the toughest fighter, the man everyone else should fear. "Your town?" she asked quietly. "That's right. My town." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering this information carefully. "Well then, Mr. Morrison, since this is your town, maybe you can tell me about the Dalton gang." The effect of her words was immediate and electric. Every face in the crowd changed, some going pale, others hardening with anger or fear. The Dalton gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, robbing banks, killing lawmen, and disappearing into the wilderness like ghosts. Jake Morrison's confident expression cracked slightly. "What about them?" "They hit the bank in Silver Creek 3 days ago," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Killed 2 people, including a deputy sheriff. Word is, they're headed this way." "How would you know that?" Deputy Williams asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his own weapon. Sarah's smile was cold as winter wind. "Because I've been tracking them for 6 weeks. The crowd began to murmur again, but the tone had changed completely. This wasn't amusement anymore. This was fear, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. "You're a bounty hunter," Jake Morrison said, and it wasn't a question. "Among other things," Sarah replied. She turned away from the crowd and walked toward the sheriff's office, her boots echoing on the wooden planks. Behind her she could hear the urgent whispers starting up, the speculation, the questions. But she'd said enough for now. Let them wonder. Let them guess. In her experience, mystery was often more effective than revelation. Deputy Williams hurried to catch up with her. "Miss, if you're really tracking the Dalton gang, the sheriff's going to want to hear about this right away. I can send someone to fetch him." "I'll wait," Sarah said, settling into a chair outside the sheriff's office. "I've been riding hard for days. An hour's rest won't hurt." But as she sat there, watching the crowd slowly disperse back to their daily business, she knew the rest wouldn't last long. Word would spread quickly through Deadwood that a federal agent, or bounty hunter, or whatever they thought she was, had arrived with news about the Dalton gang. And when Sheriff Coleman returned, she'd have to decide exactly how much truth she was willing to share, because the truth was more complicated than anyone in Deadwood could imagine. Yes, she was tracking the Dalton gang. Yes, she had a federal warrant. But what she hadn't told them, what she couldn't tell them, was that she knew exactly where the gang was headed and why. They weren't just running from the law, they were running to something, or someone. And that someone was expecting them. Sarah closed her eyes and let the afternoon sun warm her face, but her hand never moved far from the gun at her hip. In her experience, the calm before the storm was often the most dangerous time of all. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens when Sheriff Coleman returns and Sarah reveals the real reason she's in Deadwood, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think Sarah's real mission is. I love reading your theories. And don't forget to smash that like button to help this story reach more viewers who love a good Western tale. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky when Sheriff Coleman finally returned to Main Street, his boots heavy with the weight of a long day dealing with stubborn ranchers and property disputes. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from 20 years of keeping the peace in frontier towns. Deputy Williams met him before he could even reach his office. "Sheriff, we got a situation you need to know about." Coleman paused, his hand automatically checking his gun belt. "What kind of situation?" "Woman rode in about an hour ago. Says she's got federal business with you, claims she's tracking the Dalton gang." The sheriff's expression hardened immediately. "Where is she?" "Waiting by your office. But Sheriff, there's something else. Jake Morrison and his boys were giving her trouble when she first arrived. She handled it, but there's talk around town. People are spooked." Coleman nodded grimly. The Dalton gang had been the subject of nightmares throughout the territory for months. If they were really headed toward Deadwood, He needed to know everything this woman could tell him. He found Sarah exactly where Williams had said she'd be, sitting calmly in the chair outside his office, her hat tilted low over her eyes. She looked up as he approached, and Coleman felt a slight chill at the coldness in her gaze. "Sheriff Coleman," she said, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "I've been waiting to speak with you." "So I hear. Deputy Williams says you have information about the Dalton gang." "I do." Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out the folded paper again. "But first, you might want to see this." Coleman took the document and unfolded it carefully. His eyes widened as he read, and when he looked up at Sarah again, his entire demeanor had changed. "You're Sarah Mackenzie," he said quietly. "I am." "The Sarah Mackenzie who brought in Black Pete Wilson last year in Kansas?" "Among others." Coleman whistled low under his breath. Black Pete Wilson had been one of the most wanted men in 3 territories, and the bounty on his head had been substantial. But more than that, Wilson had been fast with a gun and mean as a rattlesnake. The fact that this quiet woman had brought him in alive was the stuff of legend. "Well, Miss Mackenzie, I reckon we better talk inside." Sarah followed him into the sheriff's office, a small but tidy space with a desk, 2 chairs, and a gun rack on the wall. Coleman closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. "Now then," he said, settling behind his desk, "tell me about the Dalton gang." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. "They hit the bank in Silver Creek 3 days ago, like I told your deputy. But that wasn't a random job. They were looking for something specific." "Money?" "Information." Sarah's voice was steady, but Coleman caught something in her tone that made him pay closer attention. "The bank manager in Silver Creek was keeping records for someone here in Deadwood, someone who's been moving money through multiple banks, trying to keep it hidden from federal authorities." Coleman's expression grew more serious. "What kind of money?" "The kind that comes from selling guns to hostile Indian tribes. The kind that comes from robbing federal supply wagons. The kind that gets you hanged if the government can prove you've been taking it." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he spoke. "And you think this person is here in Deadwood?" "I don't think it, Sheriff. I know it." Sarah reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. "The Dalton gang didn't just rob that bank. They tortured the manager until he told them everything he knew about the accounts he was managing. Before he died, he gave them a name." Coleman felt his stomach tighten. "Whose name?" Sarah opened the notebook and read from a page marked with dried blood. "Thomas Brennan." The color drained from Coleman's face. Thomas Brennan was one of Deadwood's most prominent citizens, a businessman who owned the largest general store in town and had his fingers in 6 other enterprises. He was also a man who Coleman had considered a friend. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Mackenzie." "It's not an accusation, Sheriff, it's a fact. I've been tracking Brennan's activities for 8 months. The federal government has been building a case against him, but they needed proof. The records in Silver Creek were part of that proof. And now the Dalton gang has those records." "They do, which means they're coming here to collect payment for keeping quiet about what they found. Or to eliminate the only witness who can tie them to Brennan's operation." Coleman stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street. Deadwood was his responsibility, and the thought that one of its leading citizens might be a criminal and that a gang of killers was headed their way because of it made his blood run cold. "When do you think they'll arrive?" he asked. "Tonight, tomorrow morning at the latest. They won't want to give Brennan time to run, and they won't want to risk the federal marshals catching up to them." "How many marshals are coming?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Coleman turned around to look at her. When he did, he saw something in her expression that made him understand why men like Black Pete Wilson had feared her. "I am the federal marshals, Sheriff Coleman. It's just me." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot. Coleman stared at her, trying to process what she'd just told him. One woman tracking a gang of killers across 3 territories, planning to face them down in his town. "Miss Mackenzie," he said carefully, "the Dalton gang has 6 men, 6 very dangerous men who've killed at least 12 people in the last year. I'm aware of their numbers, Sheriff. And you're planning to arrest them yourself?" Sarah's smile was thin and cold. "I'm planning to stop them." Whether they're arrested or buried depends entirely on their choices when the time comes. Coleman had been a lawman, long enough to recognize the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen too much death, caused too much death, and had made peace with the necessity of it. It was the look of a killer who killed for the right reasons. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to keep your deputy and any other lawman away from Thomas Brennan's store tomorrow morning. I need you to make sure the streets are clear of innocent people, and I need you to trust me to handle this my way. And if Brennan really is innocent? If you're wrong about all this?" Sarah opened her notebook again and showed him a page covered with dates, amounts, and locations. "Sheriff, I've been tracking dirty money and dead bodies across 3 territories for 8 months. Thomas Brennan's name is connected to every single transaction, every single death. I'm not wrong." Coleman studied the notebook, his expression growing grimmer with each line he read. Finally, he closed it and handed it back to her. "What time tomorrow morning?" "Dawn. They'll want to catch Brennan before the town wakes up, before there are too many witnesses around. And you'll be waiting for them." "I'll be waiting." Coleman nodded slowly. "Miss Mackenzie, I've been keeping the peace in frontier towns for 20 years. I've seen a lot of tough men and a few tough women. But I've never met anyone quite like you. Is that a compliment or a warning, Sheriff?" "Both, I reckon." Sarah stood up and moved toward the door. "I'll be staying at the hotel tonight. If anyone asks, I'm just a traveler passing through. The less people know about why I'm really here, the better." "Understood, but Miss Mackenzie," Coleman's voice stopped her at the door, "be careful tomorrow. The Dalton gang didn't get their reputation by being careless or stupid." Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Neither did I, Sheriff." After she left, Coleman sat alone in his office for a long time, staring out the window at the peaceful street scene. Tomorrow morning, that peace would be shattered by gunfire and blood, and at the center of it all would be a quiet woman with cold blue eyes and a federal warrant in her pocket. He'd seen enough violence in his life to know that tomorrow would change Deadwood forever. The only question was whether Sarah Mackenzie would survive to see the sun set again. As darkness settled over Deadwood, Sarah made her way to the Frontier Hotel, a modest 2-story building that served travelers and miners passing through town. The desk clerk, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, barely looked up as she signed the register with a false name. "Room 12, top of the stairs," he mumbled, handing her a brass key. "Breakfast starts at 6 if you're still here." Sarah took the key without comment. She wouldn't be here for breakfast, and they both knew it, though for different reasons. She climbed the narrow wooden stairs, her boots making soft sounds on the worn planks, and found her room at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over Main Street. Sarah set her saddlebags on the bed and moved immediately to the window, studying the layout below. From here she could see Brennan's general store directly across the street, its large front windows dark and empty. She pulled a chair to the window and settled in to wait and watch. This was the part of her job that most people never understood. The long hours of observation, the careful planning, the mental preparation for what was to come. Everyone saw the final confrontation, the gunfight, the dramatic moment when justice was served. Few understood the patience required to make that moment possible. As the hours passed, Sarah watched the town settle into sleep. The saloons stayed busy until well past midnight, their piano music and raucous laughter drifting through her window. But gradually, even those sounds faded, leaving Deadwood quiet under a blanket of stars. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah saw movement in the alley beside Brennan's store. A figure emerged from the shadows, looked carefully up and down the street, then disappeared around the back of the building. 20 minutes later, a light appeared in the store's back room. Thomas Brennan was preparing for his visitors. Sarah checked her pocket watch. 3:25. The Dalton gang would arrive within the hour, probably splitting up to approach from different directions. She'd studied their methods for months, knew their patterns, their preferences, their weaknesses. They were good at what they did, but they were also predictable. She opened her saddlebags and began her own preparations. Her gun belt came first, the leather worn smooth from years of use. The Colt revolver settled into the holster with familiar weight, and she checked the cylinder out of habit, 6 bullets, each one carefully maintained and ready. Next came the backup weapons. a smaller pistol that fit snugly against her ribs under her coat, and a knife with a blade sharp enough to shave with. Finally, she pinned her federal marshal's badge inside her coat, where it would be hidden, but accessible if needed. As she dressed, Sarah's mind went through the plan one more time. The Dalton gang would expect to find Thomas Brennan alone and vulnerable. They wouldn't expect federal law enforcement, and they certainly wouldn't expect a single woman to be waiting for them. That surprise would give her the advantage she needed, but only if she used it perfectly. At 4:15, she saw them. 3 riders approached from the east end of Main Street, moving slowly and quietly through the pre-dawn darkness. They dismounted near the livery stable and tied their horses where they could make a quick escape if needed. Sarah couldn't make out their faces in the dim light, but she recognized the way they moved. Careful, professional, deadly. 10 minutes later, 2 more riders appeared from the west end of town. They took positions near the bank, giving them a clear view of both ends of Main Street. The 6th member of the gang was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was probably already in position somewhere Sarah couldn't spot him. She smiled grimly. They were being cautious, which was smart. But caution could also be a weakness if it made them predictable. Sarah left her room and made her way quietly down the back stairs of the hotel. The building had a rear exit that opened onto an alley, allowing her to move without being seen by the gang members watching the street. She knew Deadwood's layout as well as any resident now, having spent the previous evening walking every street and alley, memorizing escape routes and potential cover. The alley behind the hotel connected to another alley that ran parallel to Main Street. Sarah moved through the shadows like a ghost, her years of experience allowing her to avoid the loose boards and scattered debris that might give away her position. She reached the back of Brennan's store just as the first 3 gang members were approaching the front door. Through a crack in the wooden wall, she could see into the store's back room where Thomas Brennan sat at a small table, counting money by lamplight. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with thinning hair and soft hands that had never done hard labor. Looking at him now, Sarah felt no sympathy. She'd seen the evidence of his crimes, had tracked the trail of bodies and broken lives that his greed had left behind. Whatever happened to him in the next few minutes, he'd earned it. The front door of the store opened with a soft creak. Sarah heard boots on wooden floors, then voices, low, threatening, professional. "Morning, Brennan," said a voice she recognized from wanted posters as belonging to Cole Dalton, the gang's leader. "Hope you're ready for us." "I have your money." Brennan's voice was shaky but trying to sound confident. "Just like we agreed, $5,000 to forget what you found in Silver Creek." "5,000?" Another voice, this one belonging to Frank Dalton, Cole's younger brother. "That seems a little light considering what we know about your operation." Sarah moved closer to the back door, her hand resting on her gun. The conversation inside was exactly what she'd expected. The gang demanding more money, Brennan trying to negotiate, both sides knowing that this meeting would end in violence no matter what was said. "We had a deal," Brennan said, his voice rising slightly. $5,000 and you disappear forever." "Deals change," Cole Dalton replied, "especially when we find out you've been holding out on us. See, we did some more digging after Silver Creek. Turns out your operation is worth a lot more than you let on." Sarah heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, probably Brennan standing up. Through the crack in the wall, she could see him backing toward the rear of the store, his face pale with fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Sure you do." Frank Dalton's voice was getting closer to the back room. "You've been skimming money from federal supply contracts for 2 years, moving it through banks in 3 different territories. We figure you owe us at least $20,000 for keeping quiet." "I don't have $20,000. Then I guess we got a problem." Sarah heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. It was time to move. She kicked open the back door and stepped into the store's rear room, her Colt already drawn and aimed at Frank Dalton's back. "Federal Marshal, nobody move." The effect was immediate and chaotic. Frank Dalton spun around, his gun swinging towards Sarah. Cole Dalton shouted a warning from the front of the store. Thomas Brennan dove behind a stack of grain sacks, his money scattering across the floor. Sarah's first shot took Frank Dalton in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Her second shot shattered the lamp on Brennan's table, plunging the back room into darkness just as Cole Dalton's return fire splintered the doorframe where her head had been a moment before. "It's a trap!" Cole shouted to his men outside. "Federal law, take them down!" Sarah rolled behind a heavy wooden counter as bullets began flying from multiple directions. The gang members outside were firing through the store's front windows, sending glass and wood splinters flying through the air. She could hear boots running on the wooden sidewalk outside, the other gang members moving to surround the building. "Brennan," she called out, "stay down and stay quiet." "Don't let them take me alive." Brennan's voice was high with panic. "They'll hang me for sure." "That's up to a judge and jury," Sarah replied, reloading her gun with practiced speed. "Right now, just worry about staying alive long enough to see a courtroom." A shadow appeared in the back doorway, one of the gang members trying to flank her position. Sarah put a bullet through the doorframe, and the shadow disappeared with a curse. But she knew they'd be back, probably with more men and a better plan. She needed to change the situation before they could organize a proper assault. The counter she was hiding behind provided good cover, but it also trapped her in one position. If they managed to surround the building, she'd be caught in a crossfire with no way out. Sarah pulled the smaller pistol from under her coat and checked its cylinder. 12 shots total between both guns, and she'd already used 3. She needed to make every remaining bullet count. "Cole Dalton," she called out. "This is Federal Marshal Sarah Mackenzie. You're surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now, and I'll make sure you live to see trial." Cole's laughter echoed through the store. "Sarah Mackenzie? Well, I'll be damned. Boys, we got ourselves a genuine celebrity here, the famous lady gunfighter." "I heard she killed Black Pete Wilson in a fair fight," said another voice from outside. "Black Pete was getting old and slow," Cole replied. "Let's see how she does against men in their prime." Sarah smiled grimly. They were talking instead of shooting, which meant they were either planning something or trying to work up their courage. Either way, it gave her time to think. The store had 3 exits, front door, back door, and a side door that led to the alley. The gang had men watching all 3, but the side door was closest to her current position. If she could reach it without being seen, she might be able to get outside and turn the tables on them. But first, she needed a distraction. "Brennan," she called out, "where do you keep your lamp oil?" "What?" His voice was muffled by the grain sacks he was hiding behind. "Lamp oil, where is it?" "Shelf by the front counter, but why do you—" Sarah was already moving, staying low as she made her way toward the front of the store. Bullets immediately started flying again, but the darkness worked in her favor. She reached the shelf Brennan had mentioned and found 3 bottles of lamp oil, their contents sloshing as she grabbed them. Working quickly, she uncorked the bottles and began splashing oil across the wooden floor near the front windows. The smell was sharp and distinctive, and she heard Cole Dalton curse as he realized what she was doing. "She's trying to burn us out," he shouted. "Rush her before she can light it." But Sarah was already moving again, this time toward the side door. She struck a match and tossed it onto the oil-soaked floor just as the front door burst open. Flames erupted across the wooden planks, creating a barrier of fire between her and the gang members trying to enter from the street. The side door was locked, but Sarah's boot made short work of the simple latch. She burst through into the alley just as 2 gang members were moving to cover the back exit. They turned toward her, surprised by her sudden appearance, and that moment of hesitation cost them dearly. Sarah's first shot dropped the nearest man before he could bring his gun to bear. The second man got off a shot that burned past her ear, but her return fire caught him center mass and sent him sprawling into the dirt. Now the odds were better. 4 gang members left, and she was no longer trapped inside the burning building. But she could hear them shouting to each other, coordinating their movements, trying to pin her down again. "She's in the alley." Cole's voice carried clearly in the pre-dawn air. "Box her in, don't let her reach the horses." Sarah pressed herself against the wall of the building next to Brennan's store, listening to the sound of boots on wooden sidewalks. They were moving to surround her again, but this time she had room to maneuver. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, and she could see smoke rising from the store behind her. The fire was spreading, which meant Brennan would have to come out soon, or risk being burned alive. That would complicate things, but it might also provide another distraction. A shadow moved at the mouth of the alley, and Sarah put a bullet into the wooden wall beside it. The shadow jerked back, but she knew it would return with friends. She needed to end this quickly before the fire spread to other buildings and before innocent people started coming out to see what was happening. Deadwood was waking up, and the last thing she wanted was civilians caught in the crossfire. Sarah holstered her main gun and drew the smaller pistol, then began moving toward the back of the alley. If she could reach the next street over, she might be able to circle around and catch the gang members from behind. But as she reached the end of the alley, a voice stopped her cold. "That's far enough, Marshal." She turned to find Cole Dalton standing 20 feet away, his gun trained on her chest. He was a tall man with dark hair and cold eyes, and she could see why he'd managed to keep his gang together for so long. There was intelligence in his face, along with the kind of ruthless determination that made men dangerous. "Cole Dalton," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I was wondering when you'd show yourself." "Figured it was time we had a proper introduction," he replied. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Marshal Mackenzie." "The trouble's just getting started." Cole smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I don't think so. See, I got you outgunned and outmanned. My boys are covering every exit, and that fire you started is going to bring the whole town running. When they get here, they're going to find a dead federal marshal and a tragic accident." "You're forgetting something, Dalton." "What's that?" Sarah's smile was as cold as his. "I'm still alive." The gunfight that followed lasted less than 10 seconds, but it would be talked about in Deadwood for decades to come. Both guns fired almost simultaneously, the reports echoing off the buildings like thunder. Cole Dalton was fast, faster than most men Sarah had faced, but fast wasn't enough when you were facing someone who had spent years perfecting the art of staying alive in impossible situations. Cole's bullet tore through the sleeve of Sarah's coat. Her bullet found its mark. As Cole Dalton fell, Sarah heard shouts from the remaining gang members. They'd heard the shots and would be coming to investigate. She had maybe 30 seconds before they arrived, and she intended to use every one of them. The dawn was breaking over Deadwood, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that matched the flames now consuming Thomas Brennan's store. And in the growing light, the people of the town would finally see who Sarah Mackenzie really was. The remaining 3 gang members rounded the corner of the alley just as Sarah was checking Cole Dalton's body for signs of life. They stopped short when they saw their leader sprawled in the dirt, his gun still clutched in his lifeless hand. "Cole!" The youngest of them, barely out of his teens, started forward before the others grabbed his arms. "He's dead, Billy," said the man Sarah recognized as Tom Dalton, Cole's cousin. "And she's still standing." Sarah straightened slowly, her gun still in her hand, but pointed toward the ground. The 3 men facing her were spread out across the width of the alley, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed. She could see the uncertainty in their faces. They'd followed Cole Dalton because he was fast and smart and seemingly invincible. Now he was dead, and they were facing the woman who'd killed him. "You boys have a choice to make," Sarah said quietly. "You can drop your guns and surrender, or you can join your leader in the dirt. Either way, this ends here." Tom Dalton spat into the dust. "We ain't surrendering to no woman. Cole might be dead, but there's still 3 of us and 1 of you." "3 of you," Sarah agreed. "But I'm the one who's been hunting you for 8 months. I'm the one who knows every move you've made, every mistake you've committed. And I'm the one who's still breathing while your leader is feeding the worms." Behind them, Sarah could hear voices and running footsteps. The townspeople were responding to the gunfire and the smoke from the burning store. Sheriff Coleman would be among them, along with his deputy and probably half the men in Deadwood. The gang members heard it too, and she could see them calculating their chances of fighting their way out of town. "Clock's ticking, boys," Sarah said. "Make your choice." The young one, Billy, was the first to crack. His gun hand started shaking, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Tom, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Billy!" Tom Dalton's voice was sharp with anger and fear. "We don't surrender to nobody, especially not some federal marshal who thinks she's better than us." Sarah saw the decision in his eyes a split second before he made his move. Tom Dalton was going to try to take her with him, even if it meant dying in the process. It was the kind of desperate courage that got men killed, but it also made them dangerous in their final moments. "Tom, don't!" Billy shouted, but it was too late. Tom Dalton's gun came up fast, faster than Sarah had expected, but she'd been watching his eyes, reading his intentions, and she was already moving when his finger found the trigger. His shot went wide, chipping stone from the building behind her. Her return fire didn't miss. The third gang member, a grizzled man named Pete, who'd been with the Daltons for years, saw which way the wind was blowing. As Tom fell, Pete dropped his gun and raised his hands. "I surrender!" he called out. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" Billy looked back and forth between his dead companions and the woman who'd killed them, his young face pale with shock. His gun fell from nerveless fingers and he sank to his knees in the dirt. "I don't want to die," he whispered. "Please, I don't want to die." Sarah kept her gun trained on both surviving gang members as she moved forward to kick their weapons out of reach. "Then you should have chosen better company, son." Sheriff Coleman arrived at that moment, leading a crowd of armed townspeople. He took in the scene with experienced eyes, 3 dead gang members, 2 survivors with their hands up, and Sarah Mackenzie standing calmly in the middle of it all with smoke from the burning store, creating a dramatic backdrop. "Jesus Christ," Deputy Williams breathed. "She killed 3 of them." "4," Sarah corrected, holstering her gun. "Frank Dalton's inside the store, wounded but alive. You'll want to get him out before the fire spreads." Coleman nodded to his deputy, who immediately organized a group of men to fight the fire and rescue anyone still inside. "What about Brennan?" "Still alive, last I saw. Probably hiding behind those grain sacks until someone tells him it's safe to come out." As if summoned by her words, Thomas Brennan appeared in the doorway of his burning store, his clothes singed and his face black with smoke. He looked around at the bodies in the alley, then at Sarah, then at the sheriff. "Is it over?" he asked. "For the Dalton gang, yes," Sarah replied. "For you, it's just beginning." Brennan's face went pale as he realized what she meant. "Now wait just a minute. I was the victim here. They were trying to rob me." Sarah pulled the blood-stained notebook from her pocket and handed it to Sheriff Coleman. "Everything you need to know about Thomas Brennan's criminal activities is in there. Names, dates, amounts, locations. The federal government has been building a case against him for months." Coleman flipped through the notebook, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, theft of federal property, and accessory to murder." "This is ridiculous," Brennan sputtered. "You can't prove any of this. It's all circumstantial evidence." "Actually," Sarah said, pulling another document from her coat, "we can prove it. Frank Dalton gave us a full confession before he passed out from blood loss. Seems he was more interested in saving his own neck than protecting yours." It was a lie, but Brennan didn't know that. His face crumpled as he realized his situation was hopeless. "They forced me into it," he said weakly. "The gang threatened my family. I had no choice." "You had choices, Mr. Brennan," Sarah replied. "You chose money over lives. You chose greed over honor. And now you'll face the consequences of those choices." As Deputy Williams led Brennan away in shackles, the crowd of townspeople began to disperse. The fire was under control, though Brennan's store was a total loss. Frank Dalton had been pulled from the wreckage, wounded but alive, and was now under guard in the sheriff's office. Sheriff Coleman approached Sarah as she was checking on her horse, which had remained calm throughout the entire gunfight. "Miss Mackenzie, I've been a lawman for 20 years and I've never seen anything like what you did here today." "Just doing my job, Sheriff. Taking on 6 armed men single-handedly isn't just doing your job. That was something else entirely." Sarah finished adjusting her horse's saddle and turned to face him. "The Dalton gang made their choice when they decided to torture and kill innocent people for money. I just made sure they faced the consequences." Coleman nodded slowly. "What happens now? Will you be staying in Deadwood for the trial?" "No. I'll file my report with the federal marshal's office, but my testimony won't be needed. You have Frank Dalton's confession, Brennan's records, and enough evidence to convict them both. My work here is done." "Where will you go next?" Sarah mounted her horse and looked down at the sheriff. "Wherever the next warrant takes me, I suppose. There's always another criminal to catch, another wrong to make right." "Miss Mackenzie," Coleman said as she gathered her reins, "the people of Deadwood owe you a debt of gratitude. You saved a lot of lives today." Sarah considered this for a moment. "Sheriff, the people of Deadwood don't owe me anything. They just need to remember that justice doesn't always come in the form they expect. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the middle of the night. Sometimes it comes with badges and warrants. And sometimes it comes with a woman on horseback who refuses to let evil men sleep peacefully." As she rode out of Deadwood, Sarah could hear the townspeople talking behind her. The story would grow in the telling, she knew. By evening, she'd have killed 10 men instead of 4. By next week, she'd have faced down the entire gang with nothing but harsh words and a steely glare. But the truth was simpler and more important than any legend. Evil men had come to Deadwood planning to hurt innocent people. They'd been stopped. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the territory, other criminals would hear the story and think twice before assuming that a lone woman couldn't be a threat. Sarah Mackenzie rode toward the horizon, where new warrants and new challenges waited. Behind her, Deadwood settled back into its daily routine, forever changed by the events of one bloody dawn. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last traces of smoke from the ruined store. And in the sheriff's office, Frank Dalton and Thomas Brennan sat in their cells, contemplating the choices that had brought them to this moment, and the woman who had made sure they would face justice for their crimes. The legend of Sarah Mackenzie would live on in Deadwood long after she was gone. But for Sarah herself, it was just another day's work in a life dedicated to making sure that justice prevailed, no matter the odds. 3 months later, a letter arrived at the Deadwood Sheriff's Office. It was postmarked from Denver and addressed to Sheriff Coleman in neat, precise handwriting. Sheriff Coleman, it read, I thought you might like to know that Frank Dalton and Thomas Brennan were both convicted and sentenced according to federal law. Dalton received 25 years in federal prison. Brennan was sentenced to hang, though his sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment due to his cooperation with authorities. The remaining gang members, Billy Morrison and Pete Hawkins, received 10 years each in exchange for their testimony. Justice has been served. Respectfully, Marshall S. Mackenzie. Coleman folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the newspaper clipping that told the story of the Deadwood gunfight. The headline read, Lady Marshall brings justice to Deadwood, and the article had been reprinted in newspapers across 3 territories. But Sheriff Coleman knew that the real story wasn't in the newspapers or the legends that were already growing around Sarah Mackenzie's name. The real story was simpler. Sometimes justice came in unexpected forms, and sometimes the most dangerous person in a room was the one that nobody saw coming. And somewhere out there, Sarah Mackenzie was still riding, still hunting, still making sure that evil men faced the consequences of their choices. The territory was a little safer because of her, and that was worth more than any legend or newspaper story. In Deadwood, they still talked about the morning when the quiet woman with cold blue eyes had faced down the Dalton gang and won. They talked about it in the saloons and the general store, in the church and the schoolhouse. And every time a stranger rode into town, especially a woman traveling alone, people remembered Sarah Mackenzie and wondered if justice had come calling once again. The story had become part of Deadwood's history, a reminder that heroes came in all forms and that sometimes the most unlikely person could change everything. And in a territory where justice was often hard to find, that was a story worth telling. If this story of courage, justice, and unexpected heroism has kept you on the edge of your seat, you absolutely need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're bringing you more incredible true stories from the American frontier that will blow your mind. Did you see that plot twist coming? Drop a comment below and let me know what surprised you most about Sarah Mackenzie's story. I read every single comment and love hearing your thoughts. And here's the thing. If you enjoyed this epic tale of the West's most feared female gunslinger, smash that like button to help us reach even more people who love these amazing historical stories. Your support means everything and helps us continue bringing you the most incredible untold stories from America's past. Don't forget to share this with anyone who loves westerns, strong female characters, or just incredible true stories. They'll thank you for it. Subscribe now and join our community of history lovers who can't get enough of these legendary tales.